The wind shifts. That's the first thing you notice. After weeks in the line, you learn to read it without thinking. And right now, it's coming from the enemy side, straight at you. Then someone down the trench points, and you follow his arm, and you see it. A low cloud, greenish-yellow, rolling across no man's land toward you. It isn't fast. It doesn't roar. It just drifts, silent and almost lazy, hugging the ground, pouring into the craters and pooling in the low spots as it comes. And then the cry goes up, past man to man, gongs and shell cases hammering all down the line. Gas! 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 You have maybe 15 seconds. This was a new kind of horror, and it broke something in the men who faced it that the shells and the machine guns never quite did. Because everything else in that war, terrible as it was, you could at least face. You could shoot back. You could dig deeper. You could run. But you cannot fight a cloud. You cannot duck a smell. The gas didn't care how brave you were or how good a soldier you were. It came on the wind. It found every low place a man might hide in, and the only thing standing between you and a slow death was a rubber mask and your own hands not shaking too badly to get it on in time. And once you had lived through even one of these clouds, the war was no longer only in front of you. It was in the air itself, in every shift of the wind, in every strange smell, for the rest of your life. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly what those clouds did to a man, the 3 different kinds of horror they came in, and which gas the soldiers came to fear most. And it wasn't the one that killed the most. It began in the spring of 1915. On the 22nd of April, near the Belgian town of Ypres, French and colonial troops watched a strange greenish haze drift toward their trenches and had no idea what they were looking at. It was chlorine. The Germans had quietly buried thousands of cylinders along their front and simply opened the valves when the wind was right, letting the breeze carry roughly 150 tons of it across the open ground. No one had ever seen anything like it. Within minutes, men were clawing at their own throats, and a gap several miles wide was torn open in the line as soldiers broke and ran from a weapon they couldn't shoot, couldn't see coming in time, and couldn't understand. If that cloud reached you, surviving the next minute came down to luck, to a held breath, to a scramble for higher ground, to the wind shifting a single degree. To understand the panic, you have to understand what chlorine actually does. It is heavier than air, which is the cruelest part, because it sinks. It rolls down into the trench, fills the dugout, settles into exactly the holes a man dives into for safety. And once you breathe it, it reacts with the moisture in your lungs and turns, in effect, into acid. Your airways burn. Your lungs begin to flood with fluid, your own body filling them up, until a man is, in the most literal sense, drowning, slowly, on dry land, in the bottom of a trench, coughing up froth, unable to pull in a breath that isn't fire. Survivors never forgot the sound of it. The men who lived through that first cloud had no protection at all. In those early days, before any real equipment existed, soldiers were told that in a pinch, a cloth soaked in their own urine, pressed over the nose and mouth, would help neutralize the chlorine, and it was better than nothing. That is the level of desperation we're talking about. So the masks came, and they got better fast, because they had to. By the middle of the war, the smallpox respirator gave a soldier a real chance. A mouthpiece clenched in the teeth, a clip pinching the nose shut, and a hose running down to a filter box of charcoal and chemicals that stripped the poison out of the air. It worked. But living in it was its own ordeal. The lenses fogged until you could barely see. Every breath had to be dragged through the filter, so the simple act of breathing became work. And trying to fight or run or carry a wounded friend while sealed inside that thing was a nightmare of its own. And the drill was everything. You practiced getting it on in 6 seconds, blind, by feel, again and again, because the day it mattered you would have no time to think. The men who lived were very often simply the men who got the mask on first, the ones who fumbled the straps, or whose mask had a flaw, or who took one curious breath to find out what that smell was. Those were the ones who didn't. Because the enemy didn't stop at chlorine. After that first cloud, gas changed. Sometimes it still came drifting on the wind. Sometimes it came hidden inside artillery shells, with no rolling green cloud to warn you at all. And sometimes the worst danger was barely being able to see it in the first place, because the gas a man feared in the moment was not always the gas that killed him later. The next horror was worse precisely because it was so much harder to detect. Phosgene. It was nearly invisible, and its smell was faint and almost pleasant, something like musty hay or cut grass. It didn't make a man claw at his throat on the spot. That was the trap. A soldier could breathe a fatal dose, feel only a little tightness in his chest, and carry on, thinking he'd been lucky. And then hours later, that night, in his bunk, his lungs would begin to fill, and he would die in the dark long after the cloud had blown away and the danger seemed past. Phosgene was responsible for the great majority of all the gas deaths in the war, and it killed so quietly that men learned to fear the smell of fresh mown grass for the rest of their lives. And then came the gas that made survival feel like the beginning of the punishment, not the end of it. In the summer of 1917, it arrived, the one the soldiers came to dread above all the others: mustard gas. And here is the strange thing: it was not the best killer. Most men who were hit by it survived. What made it the most feared weapon of the three was what it did to the men it didn't kill. Mustard gas was an oily, yellow-brown agent that smelled faintly of garlic, and it didn't attack the lungs so much as attack everything. It burned the skin, raising huge and fluid-filled blisters wherever it touched, and it touched the worst places: the armpits, the groin, anywhere sweat and damp let it soak in. It burned the eyes, swelling them shut, and leaving men blinded, sometimes for days, sometimes for good. And if you breathed it, it blistered you from the inside. But the truly diabolical part was that mustard gas did not blow away. It was heavy and oily, and it sank into the mud and the soil and the timber of the trench and just stayed there, contaminating the ground for days, sometimes weeks. It soaked into a man's wool uniform and kept burning him long after he had left the area. A trench could be poisoned ground that wounded everyone who passed through it long after the attack was over. It often took hours for the burns to even appear, so a man might think he was fine and wake in agony. It was designed not so much to kill as to maim, to blind, to fill the hospitals and break the spirit, because a blinded, blistered soldier ties up stretcher bearers, nurses, and beds, and spreads dread through everyone who sees him led away in a long, shuffling line, each man's hand on the shoulder of the one in front, all of them unable to see. And that is the part that lasted, long after any single cloud had cleared. The gas changed the very air a soldier breathed. Every shift of the wind became a question. Every faint, odd smell froze the blood. A false alarm could empty a man's nerves as completely as a real one, and there were many false alarms. You could be shelled and know roughly when it might come. The gas could come any hour of any day the wind allowed, and there was nothing to do but watch the breeze and keep that mask where your hand could find it in the dark. The men who survived a serious gassing often never fully recovered. Lungs scarred by chlorine or phosgene never worked the same again. Some men coughed and wheezed and gasped their way through shortened lives for decades afterward, dying slowly of a single bad breath taken years before. Eyes burned by mustard gas didn't always heal. Survival, in the fullest sense, was rarely clean. So when you picture that greenish cloud drifting silently across no man's land, understand what it really represented. It wasn't just another way to die in a war that already had 1,000 of them. It was a weapon that took away the one thing a soldier had left: the ability to face his death standing up, fighting, with some say in it. The gas asked nothing of your courage and gave nothing back to it. It simply came on the wind, and all a man could do was seal his face inside a rubber mask, breathe as shallow as he could, and wait for the air to be safe again, and then live the rest of his days flinching at the smell of cut grass.